Hi, and welcome to week 5. Today we're going to be going over a little bit more of the past tense. Last week we looked a lot, so quite a few videos on what's called the preterite tense. It's the snapshots that you can take in Spanish of the past tense when you're talking about a completed action that happened. And I alluded to the fact that there was another tense that we were going to be playing with, and that's this week. We're going to be dealing with the imperfect. Now, knowing the difference between these two can change the meaning of a sentence. Is it vital that you have to be able to use both of them to communicate? Not necessarily. You are able to get by using the past tense if you just learn one or the other, and people will at least know that you're talking in the past tense. However, as you continue to grow, since this is an intermediate level, we want to try to push you a little bit to see if you can really try to understand some of the more intermediate intricacies of Spanish. So we're talking about the imperfect. If you've got your sheet out in front of you, this is just a bare bones explanation of what the imperfect is. We'll focus on the difference of it in the next video between the imperfect and the preterite, and we'll kind of see a little bit more give and take which one's which and how they get used and re-practice them again. So the imperfect tense, if you're looking at the sheet, is used when you're referring to actions that occurred repeatedly. Don't necessarily have a finite time. I used to do something every day. I used to walk to school every day. We used to eat Sunday dinners every Sunday, really big dinners, things like that. When you're kind of prepping a story or you're talking about something that happened quite a few times, you're not giving a specific completed action, a specific occasion. It's just this is what used to happen. They also use it, if you go a little bit further down, to refer to actions in the past that were over an extended period of time. So you'll notice the use of the word used to in some of these examples that we have here. Whenever you would say used to in Spanish, or in English, I'm sorry, this is the kind of tense that you would use in English. It's not exclusive to that, but if in English you want to say used to, this is what you would use. I used to eat paella frequently. Yo comía frecuentemente paella. So it's an example of this prepping a story or talking about something that used to happen in the past. The next one, set the stage, tell a story. Whenever you're talking about something in the past tense and you're think fairy tales, think you're trying to tell your coworker about what happened to you last week. A lot of times they will use this unless it's a completed action. I mean, you're saying on Friday I went to see Iron Man. That's one situation where you would use the preterite. It's a specific completed action. But if you're telling your coworker, oh yeah, you know, we were going to San Juan's for the weekend, we were doing this, we were doing that, and you're not necessarily giving a nice specific time frame to it per se, then you would use this set the stage, which is all the same thing. It's all the imperfect. So so an example we have there, we were coming home when we saw Juan. Veníamos para casa cuando vimos a Juan. So when you have these actions that are setting the stage for a story, you would use this. Now you notice this example has one of each, because you also, when you're setting the stage for something and then there's a break in action, is when you would switch over to the preterite, and we'll talk about that in our next video. So the next one down, actions which are not physical, feelings, mental actions. I was feeling sick, or I was something. And again, you're not specifying a time frame. You're just saying, you know, where were you yesterday? Why didn't you come to work? Estaba enfermo. I was sick. Not like I got sick specifically at a specific time or completed an action. Setting the stage. I was sick. So that's when we use that. We have a few words that you will see quite frequently with this that I think are worthwhile to go over. So I'm going to read through them real quickly, maybe kind of repeat them in your head. Right down there in the middle of the list. A menudo. Often. A veces. Sometimes. Cada día. Every day. Cada año. Every year. So that cada means every. Con frecuencia. Frequently. With frequency is what they're saying there. De vez en cuando. From time to time. En aquella época. At that time, or generally referring to something a little bit back, way in the past. Oh, you know, back when I was younger. Frecuentemente, frequently. Generalmente, generally. Usually. Those are pretty easy to gauge. Muchas veces. We've seen the word vez a couple times in here, vez refers to a time or an occasion. So muchas veces, many times. Mucho, a lot. Everybody's heard mucho. Nunca, never. Nunca, never. Por un rato, for a while. Siempre, always. We've seen that a time or two. Tantas veces, so many times. Todas las semanas, every week. You can say cada semana as well. Todos los días, every day. That's somewhat interchangeable with cada día. There's a little bit of, not necessarily feeling, but just kind of use it in different contexts sometimes. It's a little bit more common, but you can use either one. Todo el tiempo, all the time. And varias veces, several times. So those are words that you'll generally see associated with the imperfect tense because you're talking about every year repeated action. Generally, we would do this. Often we would go to the supermarket on Saturdays. So that's all this kind of past tense that you're dealing with that's setting up a stage or a story. So let's look at the conjugations. They're kind of distinct, so it makes it a little bit easier. And then we have a few irregulars just to kind of look at that are pretty common verbs. So AR verbs. We're on the right-hand column. AR verbs and their conjugation for the imperfect. So again, we know what conjugations are. We have to change a verb so that it means something different in Spanish. So now we're changing this verb so that we can imply past tense, something that happened with frequency or something that happened as we're setting a story. So it's different than what we talked about last week. So AR verbs, like caminar, for example, or hablar, which is the example that we have right here. The endings are on the left-hand column. I'm just going to read through the verbs. Hablaba, hablabas, hablaba, hablábamos, hablaban. So those are the verbs that you'll kind of samples that you can see and what the endings look like. Very distinct to the AR verb because it has that aba sound, which is really the only place you see that in Spanish conjugation. And that's all imperfect past tense. So if I said, yo hablaba español todos los días, it's saying I would speak Spanish every day. Like I was in the habit of speaking Spanish every day in the past tense. Alright, so I could be talking about when I was in Mexico. Cuando estaba en Mexico, when I was in Mexico, hablaba español todos los días. I spoke Spanish every day. Repeated action. Yo hablaba español. I spoke, or would speak, Spanish every day. IR verbs. They tend to take on an IR format in this. And again, the endings are somewhat distinct and it's consistent between ER and IR. The verb we're looking at for the example there is vivir, which means to live. So I'm going to read right through them. Vivía, vivías, vivía, vivíamos, vivían. So if I say yo vivía in Mexico, I used to live in Mexico, or I was living in Mexico. Tú vivías in Loddington. You used to live in Loddington. And so it's all this past tense, setting up a story type situation. So that's imperfect in the past tense. I have a worksheet that you'll be working with. I'll go over that in a second. Let's take a look at these irregular verbs real quick because there are some irregular verbs with it. And again, these are somewhat common ones that are good to know. Ser, which means to be, so we're at the kind of the end of the sheet. In the past tense, imperfect, the same verb context that we're looking at now, but just irregular. For ser, era, eras, era, éramos, eran. Okay? So for example, yo era doctor. I was a doctor, or used to be a doctor. Yo era doctor. I wasn't actually, but that's how you could use that. Ver, the next verb over, to see. Veía, veías, veía, veíamos, veían. So I used to see. Yo antes veía mejor. I used to see better. Now I don't see as well. Ir, to go, the last verb. Iba, ibas, iba, íbamos, iban. So yo iba a la tienda todos los días. Yo iba a la tienda todos los días. I used to go to the store every day. Let's try with nosotros. Nosotros íbamos a la biblioteca con frecuencia. We went to the library with frequency or frequently. Okay? Con frecuencia. So again, it was something that was a regular repeated action, not specifying a time. So those are some examples of when the imperfect gets used. We'll talk about the distinction between them and practice them a little bit more in our next video, but if you can pull out the sheet that we have for the imperfect to practice, I'm going to read through the sentences real quick. It's a simple match, shouldn't take you very long at all, but I just kind of wanted to see you, not so much, I wanted you to focus more on the use of it. I wanted you to get the feeling behind it more so than the conjugation at this point. So sentences on the left in Spanish, on the right in English, just write the numbers right next to them as you match them up, okay? And I'm going to read through the sentences in Spanish real quick just so you can hear them and see them. It's good practice since we don't have a live in-person class. Yo caminaba a la escuela todos los días. Number 2, ella comía tacos. Number 3, nosotros estudiábamos cuando entró mi mamá. Number 4, mi amiga corría en el parque los sábados. Number 5. Ellos abrían la puerta lentamente. 6. Yo estaba en el baño. 7. Tú no querías ser malo. 8. Ellos no podían comprar el coche. And 9, sus papás nunca te dejaban comer macaroni con queso. So those are some sentences to just look at and practice. Now these sentences are great verbs or sentence structures as well. If you look at this, you get this homework done really quick. Look at the sentences for a second and maybe think about trying to use a different verb in there or swapping around the words a little bit to see if there's a sentence that you would use at work or you could use at school. Something that would make sense to you. Think about what you've said or what you've done where you've talked recently to somebody about the past tense. Maybe you were trying to relay a story of what you were doing when you broke your ankle or anything like that. And try to just pick one sentence. Don't try to do the whole conversation, but try to pick 1 or 2 sentences or 1 or 2 ideas that you could talk about in the past tense and try to put them in there and see if you can kind of work that out. It'd be a great little practice because this should go pretty quick. But that's it for homework so far in this point, and we will see you next video.